Okay, let's see. We are on to law and licensing, and Chair Hymas.
Thank you. We are first looking at agenda item 6.3, R277-308, new educator induction and mentoring amendment. The motion for the board is that the committee recommends that the board continue and approve R277-308, new educator introduction and mentoring draft 2 on second and final reading.
I think the original seems to have been labeled Kant as in continued, and then draft 1 is actually the one that's.
So there was committee action, and if I can reread it, it says Member Carey moved that the committee continue and approve draft 1 as amended, so we would be on draft 2. All right. Did you
Just
hear
like
Ben?
in Europe, where the ground floor is really the first floor?
Apologize for the confusion. In committee, there was no draft 1 to amend, so they amended the base rule, and so with the amendments, it's now draft 1 because the committee was the first to add amendments. Same thing happened on the next.
Yeah, I'll restate the motion then, if that's okay.
Should be
Okay.
draft 1. Should
Yeah.
be the motion.
So the motion for the board is that the committee recommends that the board continue and approve R277-308, new educator introduction and mentoring draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, any discussion of that motion? If seeing none, Member Lear.
So the only change I see on this draft that is the one that we're supposed to be voting on is just the grammatical change at the very end of changing from between to among. Is there a different one that I'm not, university based? Line 45. Yeah, so line 45 and the very last line. Those, great. Okay, thank you. I just want that clear.
Okay, any further discussion? Correct, as amended. Draft 1 is as amended. He read it in as draft 1, so it's before the body is correct. Any further discussion, comment to the motion? If not, it's open for voting. The motion is the board continue and approve R277-308, new educator induction and mentoring draft 1 on second and final reading. Board members, please vote.
Member Green is a yes.
Thank you. Member Green is a yes. And got one more. Are we missing one? Okay, so that passes 14-0, unanimous. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Hymas.
Thank you, Chair. We are moving on to agenda item 6.4, R277-912, law enforcement related incident reporting. Also a continuation. Okay. The motion for the board, the committee recommends that the board continue and approve R277-912, law enforcement related incident reporting draft 1 on second and final reading.
Discussion of that motion, Member Carey. Let's see.
I hit it. Do it again. There's something up with these today. Kelsey, every time I hit it, it disappears.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to speak in favor of this motion. Given that it's law enforcement and that isn't my area of expertise, I reached out to several law enforcement agencies about what other data would you like to see included from our LEAs when this data is collected. And universally it was, well, we would love to see data on mental health referrals for students. That would really help us address and better understand what's happening in the schools. I reached out to Ben Rasmussen and Chantel, and I am pleased to report that that data is already being collected, just not under this particular provision. It's being collected under R277625. So I just wanted to recognize the staff for their forward thinking, that this information is already being collected, and an amendment is not necessary, in my opinion, for that for the collection of those data points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Carey. Further discussion of that motion? Seeing no lights, we can vote. The motion is that the board continue to approve R277-912, law enforcement related incident reporting, draft 1, on second and final reading. Voting is open. Got 12 down, 3 to go. Member Green?
I'm a no.
Member Green is a no. And one left. Yeah, let's see. Everybody else in? Klein is absent. Okay, that passes by a vote of 12 in favor, 1 abstention. Member Bogus, 1 no vote. Member Green. Okay, thank you. Back to Chair Hymas.
Thank you, Chair. On to the last agenda item, 6.6, R277-406, Early Learning Program and Benchmark Assessment. The motion for the board is that the committee recommends that the board approve R277-406, Early Learning Program and Benchmark Assessments, Draft 3 on second and final reading. However, there is a substitute motion that I will present here, and then if the chair allows it, I'll speak regarding the motion,
Okay,
if that's okay. So the substitute
Sure.
motion is that the board approve the board approve R277-406 Early Learning Program and Benchmark Assessments, Draft 4.
and that is the one in backup, correct? Yeah, okay, so that's in backup. Is there a second? I'll second. Back to you, Chair Hymas.
Thank you. I'm struggling. I have been struggling with this rule for a while now. I am still not ready to move this forward. Again, that's one board member's opinion. I know that some work has been done on this. We're on draft 4, but I just wanted to state where I sit as we move this forward, where it came out of committee as well. I believe some work needed to be done. I understand the conflict between law and what we're trying to do here to get LEAs to a place regarding curriculum and forcing a very, in my opinion, narrow option of curriculum that has not proven effective yet. I haven't found the balance yet, and so I just am not there yet. So I appreciate you allowing me to speak to that, or against that, if you will.
Okay, Member Norton, is it? Or Norton and Bogus?
Yes, when I first saw these numbers come through on this particular request, they seemed familiar to me, and that was because when I was looking at my own data from my own part of the state, those numbers. I'm looking at my class data right here. I have 5 students who are marked as green, which means on grade level, that are below that. So this is 2 years older. We are telling the world that they're reading on grade level, and yet now we're going to change it so 3rd graders, have that same proficiency. So I thought, well, this is, I don't want to just look in my little bubble, my part of the world. So I reached out to others, administrators throughout the state, and I heard over and over again, we are for, high expectations. But why are we pulling, the plug on this right now? That we have asked teachers to basically, jump on board. They might have been in the middle of a master's program. They might have been, welcoming their first child within months, or they might be a new teacher to take on this very intensive training. And they did, and they have worked very hard. And now we're changing the system on them and saying, oh, that wasn't good enough. It's got to be more. And I'm just very concerned about the message that sends. I'm also very concerned that for our third graders, we are testing them with the Acadience, language arts and math, and we're testing them with the RISE language arts and math. And now we're seeing that those numbers don't add up. There's some dissonance there between the two things. And we're sending that home to parents who would really like an ABCD, not 6 reports kind of giving some different information. So I am very concerned about changing this again, or not again, but changing these numbers. I think we need to let science of reading play out. I can see great improvements. We're building wonderful momentum, but this is going to be a buzzkill.
Okay, Member Bogus, and then Vice Chair Hart, and then Member Lair.
Thank you, sir. So I would speak against the motion as well, and ditto some of the thoughts that Member Norton and Member Hymas have put forth. And I made a commitment to a constituent to read this into the public record. She issued public comment in the last Law and Licensing Committee meeting. She said, I just want to ask one more time for the cut score to be reconsidered. Students at the end of grade 3 get a score from Acadience Reading plus a score for RISE and English Language Arts. Acadience Reading scores will predict risk of not reading fluently, while RISE scores will predict access to college readiness coursework. Based on the conversation that USBE intends to lead LEAs and educators to be having about grade 3 reading, I think that they should either use the existing Acadience Reading cut score or the existing RISE cut score. There's no actual benefit, and I think this is the crux of her argument. She says there's no actual benefit to generating a third cut score through a Lexile conversion process. And so with my commitment to reading that into the record, I would speak against the motion and ask that we send this back to committee when the time comes.
Okay, Member, who's next? Sorry, is that you?
So,
Vice Chair Hart.
so here's an example, and it's been used a couple of times, so if you've heard it, I apologize. A third grader could read Charlotte's Web, which is a story many of us know. That Lexile is actually below the third grade cut score. So we would be communicating that a child in the third grade that can read Charlotte's Web is not reading on grade level. And there's ways to incentivize teachers to reach higher. I would argue that that this is a disincentive, not a support of our teachers. It doesn't communicate even though we might think that, it's got a Lexile of 680. And what would the cut score be for third grade? 750. So we might understand that it's more nuanced, the metric, but to communicate that to the general public, you are saying child that can read Charlotte's Web is not a proficient reader. And that I'm just not comfortable with. The second thing is, if the student scored that score, they would be in what's called a blue category. And help me with what the blue, it's significantly above. It's not just above, it's significantly above. So we've got kids that one metric that's going home to the parent and one metric that the teachers are talking about that says they're significantly above, but then we're saying, they're not reading quite on grade level. Now, I understand, like I said, I understand high standards, and we want those standards to be high. But it's up to us to make sure that what we're communicating responsibly. And I just don't feel like we have a system. I don't feel like this is the solution for the problem that we're trying to solve. So, thank you.
Okay, who's next? Member Lear?
Lear? And I've turned my mic off and on this. I don't pretend to understand this the way some of you do. On the other hand, I very much respect our staff. So I just want our discussion as we proceed with this to include staff explanation who are also practitioners, or they used to be practitioners. I also want to understand their perspective in the big disconnect that seems to be in this discussion. So I want to make sure I listen to them and hear from them, because I'm hearing something very different from some board members who I respect.
Okay, member, let's see, Davis? Was that a question for?
Yeah, I guess my question is, I am wondering, Chair, if in this motion we are changing a score, or if we are putting into rule a score that has been used for the last 7 years. Because what we have is an Acadian score, which measures risk factors, and we have a RISE score, which measures reading more comprehensively. We have this CUT score, which I'm not sure if is a combination of the two or how we arrived at that. But the board 7 years ago, prior to us, gave jurisdiction to the staff to create that score, which is higher than most states. So people say, well, your kids aren't reading well. Yeah, well, that's because we set our scores, our expectations higher than most states did. So are we now having a conversation about changing that so it makes more sense and matches like the Charlotte Webbs and things like this? I really think we need to get to the heart of what we're actually talking about, because the public feedback I'm getting is saying, don't raise the score. But then when I'm talking to staff, I'm hearing nobody's raising the score. If you as policymakers want to lower the score, you can, but this is the score that's been in place for 7 years. So what do we want to do in this space? And is that understanding accurate?
Is that a question for our staff? Is it
Yes.
intended to be?
I guess so.
Do we-
Anyone that can help us really wrap our heads around what's happening here.
Sarah Wibke's coming up, and maybe this might help some of us who are not. Oh, and Superintendent Dixon first. So, yeah, maybe just to clarify exactly what this does and doesn't do for those of us that don't live in CUT scores, but respect those who do. Glad we got some depth on this board. But Superintendent Dixon?
Thank you, Chair Moss. I think staff can give some brief answers, but I'm listening to the discussion, and you all have had these discussions ongoing, and I love the questions. I mean, this is a really important discussion to get it right, because we hear so often, what does reading on grade level really mean? How do we define that? How do we measure that? And I might offer that you take some time in a study session to just further develop it and have your questions answered and be able to come to some agreement among the board about how do we want to move forward so that families, teachers, everybody really understands what does that mean. We keep trying to answer that question and doing it through rules. So that's just one alternative that you could take to maybe have a study session in March on this for really some in-depth, because I mean, they could talk for hours about it, I'm sure, but I think you want a really quick answer, ma'am, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Member Davis, or should we turn it to our crew here from the team? Did you want to follow up?
I'd like it. Like, this may be the same person that Member Bogus read, but this person saying there's no actual benefit to generating a third cut score through a Lexile conversion process. Are we generating a third cut score somewhere between Acadience and Rise? And has it always been in place, or are we making a new score? Or do we need to have a discussion about, is the score appropriate in March at a further study session? This is what I'd like to know.
Director Thronson or anybody, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen?
Yeah, let me start.
Darren.
My name is Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning here at the State Board of Education. The first part of your question about when and how long has the reading on grade level proficiency cut scores been in place, you're correct. That's been in place since at least 2017. This information has been published on the school report card since 2019. And in order to come up with a cut score for a determination on reading on grade level, there's been 2 studies done on behalf of the board, both one as it got established, and then after the pandemic, there was a subsequent follow-up study that was conducted to see if what was portrayed in the initial study was still true. So that was the process that was followed to try to identify this metric, which not all states have or publish reading on grade level, but in Utah, we've been asked to do that for grades 1, 2, and 3. What I believe was the impetus of staff bringing this information and requesting it be put in rule. So on lines 79 through 83, that's just bringing the information that's already in the accountability technical manual that describes to our constituents. In addition, there's a lot more information there, but just briefly describes what those scores are, the targets that we've established for students in grades 1, 2, and 3 to be reading on grade level. To put that in a board is to make it more visible. This isn't a change from what's been in place since the origin of reading on grade level in Utah, at least during my career here. So to your point, Member Davis, this isn't an effort to increase it or decrease it. This is taking the language that's in our accountability technical manual and putting it into board rule. That was brought forward because of concerns around the curriculum that Board Member Hymas mentioned earlier as well. In the Senate Bill 127 from 2 years ago, bringing some of that into board rule to make that visible, that requirement, and give the board opportunity to address that in a public meeting.
May I follow up, Chair? Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the intention to bring this to the board is that the previous boards gave staff the full jurisdiction to create the scores. And by bringing it to the board, the staff is saying, we want board members to be a part of the conversation. And so unless there's an illusion of freedom that isn't really there, I'm assuming that we can take some time to talk about this and see what's appropriate and what isn't. And that we could postpone until March if we have an opening for study session, if it's not already full, and study this in a more in-depth way, so we look historically what's going on and what's currently happening in our classrooms and the best way forward. The risk of that sounds to me like then we risk Senator Milner or others just making changes in code in the next month to 127 without input from the board. But I think they're doing a lot of that this session anyway. So I'd rather get it right and take that risk than move forward at this time, but I'd like to hear what other people think, because if they have a different opinion, I'm willing to listen. Just seems like that might be the best way forward.
So just clarity on what's going on the Hill. Are there bills that include tweaks to this that we'd risk not being part of the conversation if we waited? Director Thronson.
Jennifer Thornton, Director of Teaching and Learning. Not at this time. So in SB 127, it says 70% of students reading on grade level by the end of third grade. We've had the reading on grade level metric for several years now, so that is the expectation. So if you change it, the perception could be that we're manipulating that data point. For example, going to green, we already have over 70% of students at green. Being green does not say you're on grade level. It says you have a lower level of risk. That's what a benchmark assessment tells you. Blue, for most of the grades, tells us you're on track to pass the state assessment at the end of third grade. So when you look at first grade, I can tell you without another assessment, the likelihood that you're going to pass the third grade assessment, given where you're ending first grade, same as second grade, and that's what the third grade kind of trajectory gets us, is this predictive factor. So at this time, there's nothing on the Hill. That it's been communicated to them, this is how we do ROGL. Here's where we are with 46% of the state, or are we at 48 now? 48% of the state at reading at grade level. And grade level, going back to Board Member Hart's comment around Charlotte's Web, Lexile is a range. It's a score, and then it's 50 above and 100 below is what you can read independently on your own. So when we say you're a 750, you can read down to a 650 well, you can read up to an 800 well. That's your sweet spot for independent reading. And the reason we brought a Lexile to the conversation, it's not another cut score. It was our way of saying to a parent, a 350 cut score means nothing to them in terms of what do I do with my kid when I take him to the library to pick out books. And so Acadians partnered with Metametrics, who does Lexiles, and said, hey, here's the type of reading text that your kid can do. So when we go to libraries, I can help my kid find a book they can read themselves. And we've actually trained city and county librarians in how to use those Lexiles to help students find books. So the Lexile is not a cut score. It was a piece that takes from the composite score to tell you that composite means you can read this level of text independently. So I hope that gives a little clarity, not a conversion.
That helps. And I would assume anything we do either here or after March would be aimed toward next school year. Do we lose that window if we talk about this in March and then take action potentially in April?
Yeah, even if you had to delay to do the special session till April, I think we're fine. It's really, we do the end of year reporting usually in August, and so the data comes in June, we start processing it in July, and we release it in August. So plenty of time for this conversation to be had and to really deeply understand something we've been working on for years, and it's being studied again to kind of look at, is there a different way to go about it that we could present? But from that consistency, this is not new. It's just been published, and it brought some awareness to communities in a way that they didn't have before.
Okay, Member Norton.
Yes, I wanted to go back because this rule does not necessarily talk about cut scores. This rule talks about Lexia and Acadian's composite scores. And those are being changed because the current composite score for third grade is 330 and it's moving up to 410. The current Lexile level is around 645 in third grade and it's moving up to 750. Now, maybe what, according to the superintendents that have responded back to me. So I do think we do need to look more into this. It's obviously there's information all over the place, but it also makes me, relook at the decision that we have and if we can maybe move legislatively for next year is why are we giving these third graders a double set of tests? We are giving Acadian's test in kindergarten, first and second. We're giving RISE tests in fourth and fifth and on up. But third graders, they get both sets of testing. And it's causing some complications, as we can see right here. Just like we did with PEEP and KEEP and Acadians, maybe it's time that we go with one set and choose one set or the other rather than do both. So that's another topic that can go on to that discussion.
Okay, so the motion on the floor was the substitute motion to approve draft 4 on second and final reading. We've had some other discussions, suggestions. Now that's been made into a motion. Still on the floor. Any other discussion or motions? Member Davis?
I move to postpone until we can have a study session in March to look at this in more depth.
Is there a second? Seconded. Member Klein has a light. Oh, okay. Did I skip you before the motion? Feel free. I think, yeah, it's all relevant. If it's relevant to the motion when we address it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I just comment on the topic in general. The Lexile scores are they're a flawed metric to begin with. And Lexile supposedly measures or interprets the complexity of a book's language, as well as the student's reading ability based on a book's Lexile level. But the range of books that can fall within those Lexile ranges is qualitatively volatile. As an example, for 4th and 5th grades, the Lexile range is set for 770 to 980. There's one book called The Big Book of Butts on Granite's online library, which clocks in at 830 Lexile level. And so that makes the cut. But an Agatha Christie book, or Murder on the Orient Express, clocks in at 640 Lexile level. It's just worse than comparing apples to oranges. The Lexile is a flawed metric to base a student's literacy level on, and this rule bases reading on 3rd grade level on a Lexile score that doesn't even speak to being a trustworthy metric.
Okay, thank you, Member Klein. Motion then, unless there are further comments to the motion, we do have Member Davis and Member Straight. Or Straight and Davis. Oh, sorry, Member Straight.
Yeah, I just like to speak to the motion. I think it's going to be good for the whole board to get some information on this. But I also want to make it clear that I, having taught language arts and reading, and I do think it's helpful for parents to have information about levels that students are reading on. I think it shouldn't be conflicting or confusing. And so maybe we need to figure out a communication that is helpful so everybody understands better. And I think it's helpful for, kids to understand reading levels and for choosing books. So they're choosing some a little easier books and some just right books and some kind of dream books. So they're getting some challenges sometimes too, but they know what they're doing and they don't hit frustration all the time because they're picking a book that's way too hard or too easy. So I appreciate all the work that's being done in this space and what everybody's bringing to the table, and I'd love to learn and hear more when we study.
Okay, thank you, Member Straight.
Yes, I thought I was getting a grasp on this until I came to board meeting today. And I'm not an elementary practitioner, but I know lots of elementary people, and I'd like to gather more information, understand it better, because I hear so many intelligent voices on both sides of this issue, and somehow I have to figure it out. So I appreciate the motion to postpone.
Okay, Member Klein, I believe, and then
Yes.
Bogus.
I would just like to ask of staff if we could get a comparison between the reading standards now and the reading standards prior to 2010. Is that something that could be sent out?
Let me direct that if that's something available, or would that take some significant research? What's out there? Sorry.
I don't know that they're available. We'll have to see. So in terms of records retention, we don't have to keep them that long. Generally, records retention is about 7 years for this kind of thing. We might have them, so we can definitely look. So I can put it on. We will do that and come back to you if we have them.
We'll see what's available.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Member, follow-up?
I just wanted, so before 2010 is pre-Common Core when that was introduced, and that significantly changed how reading was done, as they have been phasing out and almost completely phased out classical literature, except for deconstructed segments of or pieces or parts of classical literature, and brought in the informational texts. And so I would like to see what the scores were then compared to now, as well as the standards compared to now, so that we can really see what's happened as a result of that significant shift. Because currently our proficiency scores are very, very low, and I think they were much better back then. So I'd like to see the numbers.
Okay, we'll see what we have. I think staff are willing to check and see what's out there, right? Did you want to speak, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen?
Yeah, the comparability of scores, this conversation today is very relevant to that request, and that is that when policymakers establish new proficiency cut scores, like you're talking about with Rogel, when an assessment changes, so CRTs was pre-SAGE, then SAGE, then RISE, and as you've adopted new standards and changed those, the new proficiencies cut scores make it impossible to draw comparisons to prior to that because the determinations on what's proficient changes through that process.
All right, thank you. So if we do have it, I think staff will pull it, and if there's a discussion about comparability, then I assume that could be one point that would help us all understand the comparison. But thank you for that staff willingness to check and see what we've got. What other comments, questions? We got Member Bogus and Member Hymas?
Yes, sir. So are we, just for clarity, we're on Member Davis's motion?
Yes, the motion to postpone for a future study session, which
I'm on board with this, assuming we're going to send it back through committee. But if we're not going to send it back to committee, I would oppose the motion. Yeah, I understand that, but once it goes through study session, it needs to go back through committee.
Well, I don't think that's the motion, so let's clarify. Let's Member Davis, to the maker of the motion. It's gone through committee. It's now before the board. We're deferring to a study session, and let's just see what her position is, and then if you have a different position, I think, what's the intent of the motion?
Often if we take the time for the full board to do an in-depth study session, then the board feels ready to make a decision once they come back. But if we come back and they don't feel ready, then we can send, someone can make a motion to send it to committee. I just don't want to presuppose that we all spend 2 hours studying it and then assume we're not ready to vote.
Okay, the default procedurally would be that it would come back to the body it's from, which is the full board, but I guess with the option to send to committee. So, Member Hymas?
I'm ready to call the question.
I think you just did. No. Let's see. Well, if you're calling the question, we got to vote. Were you in line first? So, questions been called. Let's see where that goes. It's non-debatable, correct? So we need. All right. So let's see where this goes. It requires a 2/3 vote, which is 10. The motion's been made to call the question. Please vote.
Yes.
Member Green's a yes. That. We got 2 left, I believe. 2 more votes. 1 more vote. Oh, Member Reel is missing. Okay, that motion passes by a vote of 10-4 with 1 absent. The no votes being Members Carey, Chair Moss, Vice Chair Earl, and Member Bogus. So, question's been called. The motion is to postpone until the issue can be discussed in a future study session. Seeing no lights, please vote. We don't have lights because we just called the question. Please vote. Member Green?
Yes.
On the motion to postpone. Thank you. Member Green is a yes. And I think we're missing just 1. That motion passes 13-2 with the no votes being Member Carey and Member Bogus. All right, back to you, Chair Hymas, I believe.
Thank you. That concludes our law and licensing report out.
Okay, and with that, I understand we have lunch here.
We have standards and assessment, and then we would have 328 after lunch if we wanted to do that one thing.
Chair Booth, what's your pleasure? You want to hit that other item, one item first? Okay, so to Chair Booth for standards and assessment.
All right. We did have an information item that was very interesting, a report on the USBE. I'm going to use the letter E lab because I don't speak the word. No, I'm kidding. this, of course, the USBE Equity Lab has been in place since 2019. So 4 years of training opportunities for local education agencies to help with students and their student achievement. And this particular lab that was reported on in our most recent meeting gave some wonderful resources to teachers and highlighted the work of John Arthur, who is a 6th grade teacher, as we know, and teacher of the year back a couple years ago. And he shared practices. It was looked
Chair
upon
Booth,
as a very...
can I just cut in to see if this is an action item, or is this a report out on a discussion item?
This was just the report out, and I'm moving right now to the action item.
I'm sorry, okay. I was trying to catch up with you on this agenda. Okay, yeah.
For
we
some
normally
reason
don't
on
do
my
the
agenda,
discussion
that was
items.
just preceding the action item, and the action item has to do with R277910, Underage Drinking and Substance Abuse Prevention Program, and the committee recommends that the board continue and approve R277910 Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, any discussion to that motion? Seeing no lights, we can vote. The motion again is to continue and approve R277-910 Underage Drinking and Substance Abuse Prevention Program, Draft 1, second. Oh, Member Klein does have a question. Sorry.
So we talked about this in committee, and I am opposed to this due to it being the Botvin Skills Life Training Program that is the approved program for this. It is an SEL program, and they cite on their website under their research tab 29 out of the 41 references they're citing themselves for their research, and in the PowerPoint that was uploaded to backup from our staff, they have a bar graph that shows how successful life skills training is, but that is not specific to Botvin itself. And even if it was, there's no way to quantify or relate how well the program is working when it's prevention, because you don't know if it's the prevention program itself that prevented them from getting into underage drinking and substance abuse, or if it was something else that prevented them from it. So I would be opposed to this rule on that basis. We don't need another SEL program.
Thank you. Vice Chair Earl.
Yeah, and maybe our staff could answer this, just how many applied, right? We're required by law to have a prevention program. I'm just trying to clarify that, right? And then we go through an RFP, and those that meet the criteria. And if I remember right, there were not very many that even met criteria for the application. Was there 1, 2, 3? I'm just trying to clarify because we have to have by law. Okay. Just making sure I understand.
Okay, further discussion to the motion? If not, is it? I can't even see it. All right. Okay. It's off? All right. I think we can vote. The motion then is to continue and approve R277-910 Underage Drinking Substance Abuse Prevention Program, Draft 1 on second and final reading. Voting is open.
Member Green's a yes.
Thank you. Member Green is a yes. And that motion passes 12 in favor, 1 abstention, Member Carey, 2 noes being Member Bogus and Member Klein. Thank you. Does that conclude that section of standards assessment? Okay. Let us break for lunch. Oh, sorry, Member Klein.
There's a new draft for 328 that's been uploaded in your docs, so if you want to look over it at lunch.
Okay. Let me just note that we are actually within the noon hour as we start lunch. Boom. Red letter day. Okay, I won't jinx it. Let's do 30 minutes, then we'll be back at 5 past 1. Okay.